afternoon and welcome to ATARC's 2021 DevOps Virtual Summit. For those who do not know me, my name is Kirsten Patton and I am one of the working group managers here at ATARC, and I will be emceeing the event today. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. We are a nonprofit organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. Thank you to our partners over at GitLab, CloudBees, Sonatype, Red Hat, Fordrock, EDB, and Micro Focus Government Solutions. I would also like to thank our amazing panelists and moderators for today. Additionally, I would like to thank you all for joining us. Today will be a day full of action-packed panels, all surrounding DevOps in the federal space. We hope you enjoy this great and informative day. Up first, we will be having our visionary keynote fireside chat. And for this, we will be hearing from Lauren Nausenberger, the Chief Information Officer over at the United States Air Force. And moderating this session will be ATARC's CEO and founder, Tom Suter. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Kirsten. I appreciate the intro. And Lauren, if you can come on, there you are. And it looks like you're joining us today from the Pentagon, I guess, your office.
That's right. You guys get to see my real messy office. Darn CIO didn't approve Zoom as a download desktop app, so no cool backgrounds today, but this is the real world at the Pentagon, hanging out in the E-ring today.
I love it. Also, I think we can't go too far. I was prepping for this and I thought we had some typo. I know you'd been the deputy CIO of the Air Force since the summer, but I guess you've been officially installed as the CIO. So congratulations. How did that all go down?
Yeah, so I took on the deputy mantle in September. And I guess since our last reorg, we had a strange construct where the person who was doing the job of the CIO was called the deputy CIO, and the undersecretary was called the CIO. It was something Navy also did at the time. So I'll just say, hey, it was Navy's fault. We copied them, but our secretary signed a memo a few weeks ago, basically saying, okay, we're gonna call you guys the CIO. That's your job, and also recognizing that we'll never have an undersecretary who can be the CIO and the undersecretary. It's already too big of a job. So
yeah, well, that's great stuff. So maybe before we dive into all things DevSecOps, maybe I know you've been working on the roadmap for the Air Force, and maybe you can kind of go into general IT, security, AI, some of the things that you're working on to try to get done this year, and then we can maybe dive into the DevSecOps.
Sure, happy to. So a lot of folks that know me from my last job as the Chief Transformation Officer, I got to play with kind of the most fun stuff at the top of the stack, where you can do a few things and you're just adding value immediately. So and we're going to spend most of our discussion today kind of in the DevSecOps realm. But in this job, my goal is to go from a situation where we can solve any problem with 3 to 6 months lead time to we can solve just about any problem right now. That we have all of that infrastructure that I see as the cornerstone and foundation for our digital competitive advantage as really quite frankly as a military and an economy. That we have all of that built out so that you can just show up and and the audience that hasn't been around the DoD long is going to laugh at this. The ones that do are just going to be like, yep, I get it. But there's not a question of you're going to be able to connect, that it's ubiquitous connectivity, that you're going to have the compute that you need, that you can get into the cloud environment. That's not a big deal. Moving towards zero trust architecture as well, both for unclassified and SIPR communication, really building out kind of the data integrations that we need. And then as part of our Platform One program, we're also building out the Joint Common Foundation for the JAIC. So all of those AI ML tools that we want to have at people's fingertips in the future. So really, I see my job right now to be to prepare the battle space for all the guys that are doing incredible stuff, kind of up the stack to be able to deploy to the warfighter and know that they can actually get the capability into production without a bunch of rigmarole.
Great. we talk about COVID-19. I just think that a lot of the federal government, we were used to be in the same room. I'm going to do Devsecops. We got to have everybody co-located, all the teams, and that changed basically overnight. I think I was on the Jake. I was at the Jake on Friday before everything closed down. So how did that affect the Air Force, and how long did it take to get the productivity where it needed to be, and how are we looking in the future after COVID?
Yeah, so our DevSecOps teams, didn't miss a beat because, they were already living in the 21st century. They already had collaboration tools. In a lot of places, we had already practiced, hey, what happens if I lose this facility and I can just spin it up here or spin it up remotely? We've been training for that. A lot of the rest of the force, one of the metrics that I share over and over again is we are still behind a VPN. If you want to telework, the zero trust architecture, it's not here yet. It's on its way, but we had 7,000 VPN connections at the beginning of COVID for a 750,000 person force. So, clearly not optimized for telework. And we didn't have collaboration tools widely distributed either. And so at the beginning of COVID, first of all, short term had to shore up the VPN connections, had to really push through some of the work we'd already done on bring your own device, and also deploy collaboration tools, not just for the Air Force, but across the department so that people could work from home.
Yeah. How did you take on the challenge when you're working in a SCIF and now you have to do social distancing and now I have to work? Did you have to segment some of the jobs stuff out? Were you doing some of the work, that required behind a SCIF? How did you balance that out to continue the productivity that you needed?
So on the operational side of the mission, we had to take risk. If we have live missions going, people masked up and did the best they could to distance and had to push forward. Around the Pentagon, for the most part, you don't have every single person needing to be on secret or top secret machines at the same time. So we did two things. First, we doubled down on our infrastructure for mobile classified telework. So that people could do secret work from home when they needed to. Right. And then we also got into more of like a A team, B team, where some people were in the SCIF certain days and other people other days, or 1 week on, 1 week off, so that we always had coverage. Because a lot of the work if you're not at the pointy end of the spear, you're really keeping up with the communications and knowing that there's something hot that's happening that you need to support.
Great. That's fantastic. I know from the outside world, sometimes it's a little confusing. I know you started with the Kessel Run. We've got a lot of Star Wars. We got some Bespin. We actually, I think, got Kobayashi Maru. Which is a Star Trek. I'm a geek, but it's a Star Trek reference. How are all these centers working together and collaborating? Are they all using Platform One? Is that the common denominator there?
So no, they're not all using Platform One. We're trying to encourage adoption of Platform One as much as possible. Kessel Run was the first, team to build a platform within the Air Force. And so, and they've had to actually vertically integrate. So they have not just built their own development platform, they've also had to build their own production infrastructure. Because, if you look at kind of the way that we do legacy infrastructure, you still have to get, just crazy approvals and all this stuff. And the base commander has to wait, all of these things. So we deployed infrastructure in a new way with them as well to test it. And so the way that we have deployed infrastructure for them is really more in line with the way that we'll deploy infrastructure in the future, where, even at the secret level, it's in the cloud, where there's a lot more room to maneuver and deploy, modern capabilities. But we still do have a pretty strong DevSecOps community. Everyone's in Mattermost, sharing information on a daily basis. And then, of course, we have DevSecOps summits as well, where folks will get together and just kind of share, hey, this is what we're working on, kind of big updates for senior leaders as well. So, it's definitely a community where people are helping each other. There's occasionally some friendly rivalry too. But we are trying to push folks to reuse, as far down the stack as they possibly can, and to work together as much as possible on things like talent management and design, sharing code. We definitely want everyone sharing containers in Iron Bank. So it's really moving toward more of an enterprise setup than we've ever had in the past.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And add a little color to what you're doing with the Joint Common Foundation, and if you can, maybe touch a little bit on AI ops. That's like kind of like we're getting a lot of government people interested in the topic of AI ops, but I think it's smart for the Jake to work with what's already out there rather than build something completely from scratch.
Well, I mean, the Jake is working with us on, Jake kind of coined the JCF term, the Joint Common Foundation term, and then said, hey, Platform One, can you do this to everybody? And of course we said, absolutely. So really the idea there is to just provide the tools so that people can get access to what they need to jump. There's still, a lack of training quality data, to get after some of these algorithms at scale. But some really bright spots. Like there are certain missions where we are ready to go. You've seen some successes on Maven. We've had some really great successes with predictive maintenance. And there are many others. But I would say that we don't yet have at scale, just really great training quality data, a common environment, ability to get all the data that you need to answer a question at any given time, and the solid infrastructure to back it all up. So those are all things that we're bringing together right now to get after this problem, both theoretically, academically, and for JADC too, because quite frankly, those machine-driven insights, that's kind of the point.
Yes, and one of the big things that we've done here at I'm a tech person, but I realize that workforce transformation is a big deal. How do I get my airmen and civilians upskilled, reskilled? What's ongoing in the department on that front?
So there are things going on at a lot of different levels. I'm actually just back from Keesler Air Force Base, so it's just where we train a lot of our cyber personnel. And they're just doing really incredible things. And especially since COVID, completely on board with blended learning and just new types of learning in general, which was really great to see, and their numbers are going up as a result, which is cool. We've also launched Digital U so that, regardless of why we hired you, we've literally had folks who are the cook become our ninja in Python, which I love because of moving under siege. It took the cook to beat all the, terrorists storming the battleship. And so really it's a lot of how do we level the playing field and give anyone access to training, know what skills they have and be ready to throw them into a mission, but also mix with some OJT. Because, if I'm an enlisted coder, I can go to Kessel Run and I can do an internship and it's going to be the best learning of my life. I'm going to go and do paired programming. I'm going to go learn to do test-driven development. And then when I leave there, I'm going to be ready to go and really produce for my mission, but have this incredible network behind me. And same for Platform One.
Yeah, I think Keesler's actually doing some virtual reality, cool stuff down there.
Yep, they are.
I don't know how we're going to get that integrated into Platform One. I hadn't thought about that one, but that's really cool. A little bit about maybe the return on investment for all this work and sweat equity that you have put in. Is there any numbers in the Air Force for this whole DevSecOps process and speed and agility? Is there any numbers that have come back?
So there are lots of metrics on this. The cost of delay. I mean, Kessel Run probably has some of the best, really easy to understand metrics. Okay, instead of waiting 5 years for something that maybe would work, we started saving $500,000 a week on fuel really quickly by deploying an algorithm just for the tanker planning. And since then, many, many other examples of saving money and increasing productivity. And there's a lot more to do there. I will say that we still have to fight with the cultural mindset that anything we do in DevSecOps or technology writ large is an additive cost. I don't think that, a lot of people that are closer to technology see the immense trade space there, but not everyone does. Not everyone kind of understands how important it is to the warfighter. And so we're doing more to get the warfighter voice in there. To share, on one hand, how crappy some of our apps are today, and then just how good they could be. And actually one example of that, we had, so we have a tool called AFIMS. It's where you put in all your fitness management. And there was a great meme done by Airman on Facebook where it's like, do you have the hands of a surgeon? Because only if you could like apply to medical school can you use this thing, going through like 7 embedded drop down menus. And so we're able to show that this thing where people are wasting so much time, that just in a couple of weeks for a very small amount of money, you can just make someone's life easier. And then what if you do that at the pointy end of the spear? It's like all of a sudden just we're so much more efficient with our tanker planning. There are so many other things that we're doing right now for our AOCs where, it's like instead of going up the stairs, entering it here, handing the paper to this guy who enters it over here. I mean, it's ridiculous, some of the things we're doing. So, huge trade space there. And really we're going through, I don't know if you've heard of Operation Flamethrower, but that's one of my top initiatives for creating trade space, where we're literally going through and saying, what are we doing that's dumb? Where can we just slay and ruthlessly attack manual process? Where can we kill policy that's in our way? And where can we literally remove redundant IT? Like we find switches in closets that are like clogging up a whole base. I mean, just the stuff that, that we have uncovered is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, I used to have a company in that space. Yeah, I've been in many closets in Air Force bases. That's fantastic. So what are some of the initiatives that we didn't cover that around DevSecOps that you think we'll be talking about next year when we do this? We have our next summit that you're working on this year that you think will be pretty cool.
Sure. So certainly driving a little bit more adoption of Platform One. And that's kind of obvious, moving toward the enterprise services. But I'm really hoping that we're pushing our secret environment to be a little more DevOps friendly. And so I'm hoping that by next year, I'll be able to say, hey, at least for our AOCs, maybe for our entire force, maybe for the entire DoD, that we have, one secret environment where we can talk with our vendor partners, we can talk to our allies, we can deploy code, and we're all in the cloud, zero trust architecture, software-defined networking, and we're able to easily see the data that we need to see and not the data we don't, and start doing some just really awesome analytics, across all of our different sets.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. I'm getting bounced by my own people now. I don't usually, I usually MC these things, so I don't want to get in trouble with Kirsten. But thank you again, Lauren, for your time today. This is just fantastic, and congratulations again on being your newly appointed CIO of the Air Force.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Glad to be here with you guys. And thanks to you, your audience, and your sponsors for all the things you're doing to support our air and space forces. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Tom. So I would like to now introduce our first emerging technology talk of the day. For this, we will be hearing from Tracy Robinson-Williams. Tracy is the technology business strategist and digital cultural transformation evangelist over at GitLab. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you very much, Alyssa, and congratulations, Lauren. That's wonderful news to hear for you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining the session. At GitLab, we've been very interested in the results of the inaugural ATARC DevSecOps landscape survey. We've been very eager to learn more about the challenges of federal agencies, departments, and organizations that they're facing when it comes to developing, testing, securing, delivering the applications required to support their missions. Next. So since you're here with us today, I'm going to assume that you also want to better understand how your peers are seeing the challenges to IT modernization and digital transformation, what steps they're taking to accelerate the development and delivery of their software, and ways that you can also speed up both your software and the ATO process. Next. So let's start with one of the most interesting observations from the survey, and that is, of all the potential challenges respondents could have identified as being their biggest obstacles, they chose cultural resistance to change. Lauren just alluded to that as well, but think about that. In a world where the typical answer to problems is to throw technology at the issue, and if that doesn't work, keep trying the newest technology until it does. The real problem is with the internal barriers to improving culture, methodologies, and processes around software development. People are just reluctant to change. But what happens when the organizations then put tech first without first addressing cultural challenges or changes? A lot of organizations have learned the hard way that after sinking a lot of money, time, and effort into that dysfunction, that the end result is simply more dysfunction. They still have the same problems, and people are even more entrenched in the cultural obstacles that were creating the problems in the first place. So in other words, technology is an enabler, but it's not your silver bullet. So you really have to put the culture first and the technology second, and use culture as that foundation of your digital transformation. But that's a deeper conversation for another day. The next biggest challenge, which we will discuss today, and that's been identified as the problem with getting through the stringent and very frustrating process of the authority to operate process, right? So while there are good reasons for the challenges that have been instituted with that, the result is really a further delay in getting applications into the hands of users within the organization and to the public. So in fact, nearly half of survey respondents reported that it typically takes more than 4 months for their organizations to grant an application ATO. Now, the good news is that there are ways to automate and accelerate much of that process. And we're going to talk about that in just a bit. Now, the survey also identified 6 key steps that agencies are implementing to get code out the door faster. The top 2 ways, according to 57% of our respondents, are to automate the CI/CD pipelines and to implement source code management. Automating CI/CD improves cycle time, empowering engineers to work on software development rather than waiting on their tool chain or performing tool chain maintenance. So when a large portion of an agency's time and their IT budget is spent on undifferentiated engineering, like systems that require extensive integration and maintenance, et cetera, it means that fewer engineers are working on mission-focused efforts. And when there are too many dependencies, too many handoffs, too many manual tasks, it causes delays between when code is written and when the organization gets value from that code. And in the worst cases, when code is written and the organization never gets any value from it at all, it can often sit sometimes in limbo waiting for others to manually test it. And by the time it's finally reviewed, it's already irrelevant. So in all of that, it lowers, it all results in lower developer productivity, lower developer happiness, and less reliable software. Next. So instituting good source code management as a single source of truth is also critical to increasing speed to delivery. Designing and developing applications is a very intensive activity that requires managing branches in the source code, tracking frequent changes in multiple files, and securing those changes from vulnerabilities, all while merging and integrating those changes to the main branch. So with distributed source control, it allows developers to work independently from a centralized repository and to keep that work in sync with the larger team. Distributed source code management then enables coordination and collaboration and sharing across the entire software development team, accelerating that time from idea to plan to field delivery. There are other key steps that include adopting planning tools for future software projects so that you can prioritize and structure your work, automating testing within the continuous integration pipeline, and reducing the number of tools and simplifying your tool chain. Also incorporating, next, I'm sorry, Alyssa, can you change? Thank you. Reducing the number of tools and simplifying your tool chain, and incorporating application security scans for early security vulnerability feedback and remediation. That's going to help you deliver that code maybe 10 to 20 times faster without sacrificing security. So you can learn more about all of these steps and some other resources that have been developed regarding the survey, including 6 ways federal agencies are delivering better code faster, the infographic for that. Next. So when it comes to getting through the ATO process, it can be fraught with a plethora of challenges. Not only does every agency have slight differences to their approaches, even at the program level, there can be nuances to security controls. Not centralizing and not collaborating can often be a problem too. And that means that sharing isn't optimal. There's a lot of recreating the wheel between different entities as they're trying to go through the process. In addition, there can be issues depending on the way the security teams are involved, or who's specifically involved and their particular again, nuances on how that works, as well as bottlenecks and inconsistencies for control implementation. And this all results in it taking longer for mission critical apps to get to those who need them. But there's a better way to deal with that. There's a proven path to accelerate both app delivery and that time to ATO approval. First of all, it's really important to simplify the tools in your tool chain by reducing the number of tools, the complexity, the integrations, and how they're all tying together, the maintenance, et cetera, of that tool chain. You reduce the solution complexity. And by doing that, consequently, you're going to reduce the required security paperwork and all of the work that goes into that one. So after you do that, it's good to then establish a standardized method of implementing those controls for all your application delivery processes across your entire organization. And standardization is very key in terms of automating everything. Then enable all of your the areas of your organization and the programs to implement the security controls you need in a standardized fashion. And being able to do that is also going to speed up this whole process. And finally, use governance, policy, collaboration across the enterprise to ensure that the most relevant controls are utilized in the most efficient manner. So by following this approach, agencies have been able to reduce their time to ATO from weeks or months. And as we mentioned before, like some of these agencies are spending up to 4 months doing this, to just a couple of hours. We have specific examples we can talk about if you'd like to do that, of agencies who have gone from weeks to 2 hours. And this all flows into supporting a continuous ATO process. So if you'd like to learn more if you'd like to learn more about the results of the ATARC 2021 Federal DevSecOps Landscape Survey, you can head over to the resources page. And if you'd like to read more about how IT modernization through Devsecops can help your agency, we invite you to check out this white paper. So check out these QR codes. And I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. So back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Tracy. That was an amazing presentation. Up next, we have another emerging technology talk. I would like to now introduce you all to Tyler Johnson. He is the Senior Solutions Architect over at CloudBees. Over to you, Tyler.
Thank you, Kirsten. I appreciate it. And hopefully everyone can see my screen now as well. Thank you all for joining us for today's Emerging Tech Talk with the ATARC webinar series. So like Kirsten mentioned, I'm Tyler Johnson. I'm a solutions architect here at CloudBees. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about how CloudBees can help with the security of your software supply chain, something that is top of mind right now, especially with the recent events involving SolarWinds, and certainly a concern and something that we're tracking not only as an industry, but across the federal organizations as well, whether you see it on 60 Minutes or you've been reading the blogs like I have, seeing the depth and the breadth of this actual hack that just recently occurred, which was a result of deficiencies inside of the software supply chain itself. So a good place for us to level set is an idea of what a general software delivery lifecycle may look like and the possible points of entry in the SolarWinds incident itself. And you can see here the complexity of what attack surfaces may have been penetrated, what is the reasoning for those, and most importantly, as a part of this graphic, who are the stakeholders that are directly involved with these practices. Was code injected directly onto a developer machine and then pushed into a version control system? Was access directly benefited to the version control system itself? Did they gain entry points to your automation engine, to your artifact repository, or even direct access to a deployed environment, whether that be capacity or production? And this is just an example of a very basic software delivery lifecycle, and you can see the immense amount of things that you need to be concerned about when you're talking about the software supply chain and securing that. So what we really want to talk about today is that process itself, fortifying the process with the automation, with human loop processes, really starting to move towards the sec part of DevSecOps. Automation enables you to provide a lot of security and fortify that process rather than just trying to limit the attack surface and trying to protect the different angles of approach that a hacker may have into your software delivery lifecycle. That's really important. However, we really want to focus on the idea or the analogy of your software supply chain being a bank and all of those attack surfaces being something like the doors and the windows to the building. You want to make sure that they're locked. You want to make sure that they're secure. But just like a bank, if you invest in a vault, which would be your automation engine, your Jenkins pipelining, your software delivery lifecycle itself, even if they get inside of your system, and based on all of our conversations with security-minded folks, you operate under the context that someone is always operating with malicious intent somewhere inside of your network or inside of your supply chain. If you build in that automation, just like this kind of vault example, you can find those issues, you can find where they've been, what they're trying to do, and you can effectively mitigate the risk from propagating through the different environments on its path to production. And that's done by a combination of automation efforts, really doing as much as you possibly can to the far left side of your software delivery lifecycle, catching failures, generating tickets and feedback back to developers or back to even Jira issues or stories that you may be creating. And then also making sure that you fail tasks as they move into pre-production or production environments or across, certain security enclaves as well. And that's exactly what we want to kind of focus on here. So solidifying the pipelining structure itself, building a robust process with standardization, governance in mind, and certainly compliance so that none of this could happen again. Or if someone does get inside of your software supply chain, you have the ability to stop them right there in their tracks. So a good way that we help in doing this is through software delivery automation. And it starts with CloudBees being the enterprise sponsor or warden of the open source Jenkins project. If you're not familiar with Jenkins, it's an automation engine that's really focused on building artifacts, testing artifacts, and promoting them into some sort of an artifact repository. And from there, then it furthers its journey down to the operations side of the house, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But it starts in that far left motion of focusing on what developers are doing, making sure they're using standardized processes, which you can use with templates, making sure the integrations and the tools that you choose, because you shouldn't be too prescriptive or fitting into the box of, an easy button for DevOps. Each organization and each team inside of an organization has their own best practices and their own tools that map to them being as efficient as possible. And through templates and through the ability to create allow lists and deny lists for those integrations, you're able to take that commit and acceptance stage within the CloudBees engine, and you're able to build a beginning section of a really robust software supply chain to make sure that everything from a developer commitment to a developer test to a developer promotion is done in a really compliant, secure, and standardized fashion. And now you're taking what for a long time in the CI world has been developer focused and making sure that they can be as efficient as possible, and you're throwing an enterprise twist onto that. So now you're making sure that it's geared and angled towards a security mindset, thus ensuring that we can kind of solidify that software supply chain to a further extent. And importantly, throughout this, I want you to kind of see here at the top, version control systems throughout this should serve as your source of truth. So we're really, heavily invested in configuration as code and moving towards GitOps. And that's really best represented with a graphic like this. And what we've seen is that as folks move towards GitOps, it's not just about speed. It's not all about just being on the latest and greatest configuration as code. This is all wonderful. If you're all working from the same sheet of music and everything is version controlled, you also have a very clear line of progression. So when I want to make a change, it goes through the exact same process that developers do, so does infrastructure. And likewise, as you build this body of evidence inside of your version control, it is a very clean, auditable history in which you can go back and either make rollbacks to, track issues, or even do promotions of new software in a really compliant way through code changes inside of your version control base. And what this really ends up looking like is that your Git or your version control system, which in this example I'm using Git, now is an exact copy of the infrastructure or your automation pipelines running on CloudBees, running in Jenkins, running in Ansible. All of those different tools that you might be using are now reflected inside of your version control system in a direct copy. So you're really minimizing drift, and you're adopting the most cutting edge practices of moving towards GitOps, and you're reaping the benefits of configuration as code of not just your applications, not just your infrastructure, but your tools and your automation as well. And then if we kind of take that and expand that out to another level, so that part of the discussion is really about how do I empower developers? How do I shift security left? Now we need to talk about where does this fit into operations, or where does this fit into ensuring trustworthy releases? And importantly, this view inside of CloudBees SDA allows you to compile reports, pull in data points from everything outside of the scope of just a developer or an app dev team. Pull in things like Jira tickets, stories, change logs, Jenkins results, parse out results or scans from SonarQube or Twistlock or Nessus. There's a lot of different tools that go into a software delivery lifecycle. So being able to pull information from those, populate dashboards, generate a body of evidence that can then be promoted from environment to environment, building on an audit trail, gives stakeholders like release managers and AOs eventually the ability to consume these in a really educated fashion so that they can make push button predictable releases. But at the same time, remember, we're focused on security, so we can build gateways and thresholds to make sure that any malicious intent that was injected into your supply chain is caught and stopped right then and there, and a feedback loop is generated directly back to the developer in an automated way so we can make corrections from that. So this is a really, really kind of important step moving forward. And it's also a really good and clean way to kind of start evaluating things like a continual or accelerated ATO process. And lastly, and I kind of want to leave you with this as I hand it back over to the ATARC folks, importantly, along this process, we want to make sure that we always have analytics and data-driven decision-making in place across both Jenkins work, your automation engine, your release structures, and across developer teams, operations teams, release teams, security teams. So the ability to parse out information, track your performance, obviously continuously improve and make sure you're sharing those practices internally, just like you saw from our colleagues at GitLab. You're looking at the ability to constantly drive cultural innovation. And that is a really deep challenge for a lot of organizations today. And this gives you the ability to garner those insights and make that a reality. So thank you so much for joining. And I hope you can see where the focus is moving towards the secure software supply chain. And as always, we'll share information after this. I really look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Tyler. That was really excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So I would now like to introduce our first panel of the day, and the moderator for this panel will be Jory Heckman. Jory is a reporter over at the Federal News Network. And Jory, I will let you take it from here.
Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks everyone for joining me this afternoon. I'll be leading the discussion on exploring DevOps in the time of COVID-19. And just to get started here, I would like to introduce my panelists in just a moment. But before I do, please keep the questions going and coming through the conversation. As we roll along here, we want to make sure that we have time to go through all the questions and that we make this as interactive as possible. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Ian Anderson, who is the lead DevOps engineer for the Navy, Stephanie Taylor, the acting cloud strategist and data center services manager for the Federal Aviation Administration, Stephen Proskowski, the security test and evaluation federal lead for CISA, Shenandoah Spears, the Associate Chief Information Officer for Applications over at NASA, and Derek Weeks, who's the Vice President of Sonatype and the co-founder of All Day DevOps. We have quite the panelist, and we have quite the variety of expertise here. So very exciting conversation we're about to have. I'd like to give everyone a moment to maybe do a more fulsome introduction of themselves. But I'll also kind of couch it as a first question here and just asking everyone, how generally speaking, the pandemic has challenged your agencies as it pertains to DevOps. I will turn it on over to Ian first. Ian, why don't you give us a better introduction to yourself and take a crack at that first question?
Yes, thank you, Jory. I work with Naval Surface Warfare Center Dahlgren. I'm actually at their Dam Neck Annex down in Virginia Beach with the department that's down there. So I'm a lead DevOps, DevSecOps engineer. So to kind of, take apart this question, I want to take a look at, what were our operations like for the Warfare Center before COVID-19? So we're a working capital fund. So we just get money from the government just to keep our buildings, keep our lights on. And the majority of the funds that are coming in through our projects. So what we have and what we are seeing, or saw before COVID-19, is a lot of these departments and even a lot of the projects and groups all together were very siloed. Really people within the department only talked to other people in the department, and there wasn't really too much back and forth throughout the entire Warfare Center. And I especially saw that as, our department is down in Virginia Beach, completely separated from the entire Warfare Center. So with the onset of COVID-19, we went from everybody in the office to the max telework stance. And it was actually, as bad as it was actually a great time for the Warfare Center, as our 5-year strategic plan was just expiring. And we were looking at, what do we want to do in the next 5 years? So COVID-19 really, showed us the deficiencies that we had, especially with the Warfare Center, that for the first time this year, the large portion of the workforce is the computer scientists, computer engineers, data scientists. So a lot of the development work is really what Dahlgren does. So, with the pandemic and everybody now in the max telework stance, we realize that there aren't people there to press the button on the server, to stand up servers or VMs on the servers, all that manual stuff that was going on. So our technical director came down with, kind of his plan of moving forward, what he wanted to see. So we started a hybrid cloud task force. Dahlgren was one of the early adopters of the GovCloud, both AWS and Microsoft Azure. And we wanted to see how we can best utilize, both of those GovClouds as well as what we already still had on the premises. So one of the groups under that, it was the Software Factory group. Right now, it's what we call the Software Factory Foundation. What we're looking at, what are those tools that we need to stand up and get groups to, whether they are using CI/CD pipelines, DevOps, or to get them thinking about using, CI/CD pipelines, DevOps, and, best practices. So, with this group, we went out, surveyed kind of all the departments, and we got everything from, groups, projects that are doing full DevSecOps, everything that you would want to do with that, to people asking us questions like, what are containers? What is a pipeline? So, we really saw that division, the silos between not only the departments, but even groups within the departments. So we came back together and we said, how do we stand up a software factory foundation that is, that is going to get these groups to think about, utilizing CI/CD pipelines, DevOps best practices, but not hinder those groups that have already, those established processes and, their tools that they're using. So we came up with kind of an approach to where we had an artifact repository, Kubernetes instance, and a code CM tool. So those groups that weren't doing any of this, that had a lot of questions, that really needed that hand holding, could be onboarded, could have that help that they needed. And then on the other hand, we did not limit and say you needed to use these tools that we have stood up for you. We allowed anybody who already had tools stand up to be able to integrate into this environment as well. So COVID-19 has really kind of made us think that, we really need to break down these silos that we have and get this collaboration between all the departments to not, I'm sure some vendors out there in industry have seen where, a group will buy some licenses and then within a year when the project's over, they don't renew the licenses, to kind of get everybody working together and, using those common tools, common procedures and practices to put out better products faster, with the Warfare Center. So I'll leave it there, and we can move on to the next person.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ian. And Stephanie, I'll turn it on over to you and give us a better sense of your work at the FAA and how things are going there with respect to DevOps and the intersection between that and the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. My name is Stephanie Taylor, and in my official capacity, I lead the FAA's Cloud Center of Excellence as their cloud strategist. Recently, I was asked to act over all FAA data centers because we had a data center manager that left abruptly and they didn't have anyone to take over the data centers. And so I guess, pulled the short straw. And so it's unique though, because I get to see in cloud, we're very mature in our DevOps adoption. We have a very sophisticated tool chain. We have Jenkins, Git, Artifactory. We use Terraform for infrastructure as code. So we're fairly automated there, with the exception of security, scanning, continuous monitoring, stuff like that is still a challenge for us. In the data center, we had been trying for about a year to get a tool chain going before we actually got our authority to operate in cloud. And so DevOps, our data centers are still kind of hindered by a lot of manual processes. And so what I get to witness is during the pandemic, when we have challenges come up, how we respond in the cloud where we have our tool chain mature, and how we respond in the data center. Today was no exception. I came in this morning and right away on my schedule was an invite from the SOC, our Security Operations Center, again, for a SolarWinds data call where we've got to go see if there's some file, add find.exe or something on a SolarWinds server. For our data center, we've got to go through hoops. We've got to get permission. We've got to do the contact tracing. We've got to get permission for them to go on site. It's very manual for them to go on there and physically access that server. Someone brought up how difficult that is. It is. But on the cloud, we were able to do things like use security groups to isolate the SolarWinds server and then have a jump server that can access that. And we use our DevOps tool chain to manage that and access and run the things that we need to run to pull the information that we need. And no, we don't have to worry about the contact tracing and going on site. So, there's lots of other examples, that I'll address in the Q&A, but I basically wanted to just tell you that and versus DevOps bringing challenges or the pandemic bringing challenges to DevOps, we found that DevOps has helped us through many challenges during the pandemic. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, very good. Thanks for all that, Stephanie. And I'm going to turn it on over to Stephen over at CISA. Stephen, help me better understand how things are going over at CISA and how DevOps has intersected with the pandemic over there.
I think the biggest thing that we've experienced with DevSecops and the pandemic is the change in really working from home. Ton of meetings now and going pure virtual compared to being able to go to somebody's desk and sit with them, if we had to do peer programming. It's different now. You can't just sit there and point at something on the screen. You got to make sure everybody can get into like a room on Teams and talk. And of course, your environments are all separate. So your dev is not on your normal environment where you can access Teams and everything else. So it's been an interesting challenge, but I think we've overcome it pretty well and try and put more tools into the pipeline and really make the pipeline do what we need to do.
All right, very good, very good. And I'm going to turn it over to Shenandoah over at NASA. Tell us a little bit more about what's been front of mind for you working over at NASA.
Yeah, so Shenandoah Spears, as you stated, the Associate CIO for Applications, and we did pretty well. I mean, considering that one day we were all working at a physical location and the next day we weren't. Luckily, NASA had invested in quite a bit of their VPN in their network environment prior to COVID. And so we were able to transition fairly well. All of our tools like the source code repository, GitLab, and the CI/CD pipeline was all being accessed remotely anyway. And so it really wasn't that big of a shift for us. What I would say is a shift is kind of what others have explained, and that is the personal face-to-face type people that you get to meet, right? Moving that to a virtual environment with teams and not being able to quite read people's body language, as an example, those kind of things that we're struggling through. But DevOps has definitely helped us, not only at the tool layer, but also at the people layer. So when you think about development and operations coming together as an agile team to deliver value to our customer. So we're looking at doing that. We're bringing in agile coaches to help with that as well. We're adopting one of the frameworks called SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework for the Enterprise, and trying to adopt that in a virtual environment with some program increment planning and things like that, to try to pull together not just the tools of DevOps, but the conceptual of development and operations, and of course security, all working together with our business. So that's our journey. That's where we're heading to next.
Awesome. Well, certainly a lot more to unpack there. And Derek, I'm going to turn it around over to you. Certainly not an agency perspective, but from the industry standpoint here, what are you seeing as some of the most salient points right now between what's going on with DevOps and what's going on with the pandemic?
Yeah, so Jory, thanks for having me on the panel. Thanks to ATARC as well for inviting me to these discussions year after year, because I love participating in what's going on with DevOps and government agencies, and work with several folks across many different agencies. Just a little background, I'm Vice President at Sonatype. We help developers and their organizations manage their software supply chains, and security being part of that management. I also co-founded All Day DevOps, which I'll talk about in a bit, but it's the largest DevOps conference in the world. And we've run that for 5 years now. Just in terms of Sonatype, specifically where I work, our impact with COVID was not significant at all. One, because before COVID hit, we were 90% of our workforce, maybe even more, was already 100% remote. So people didn't need to shift to a new way of working. And we increased the size of our workforce by 20 or 25% last year. We hired a lot of people. We were hiring 40 people in January. So we're used to hiring people and onboarding in this kind of environment already. So I think things didn't get any easier, but things didn't get any worse for us. But I think in general, a lot of people out in the workforce are looking for remote opportunities. And this change in COVID really forced that remote work opportunities. And I think there were agencies that were saying, you can't remote work, that all of a sudden said you have to remote work. And then they're thinking about strategies to say, we're actually going to allow more people, once the pandemic is over and we have the opportunity to return back to work, more people having those opportunities post-pandemic as well. I think in the DevOps community, the one thing that really excites me about the DevOps community, and has in the 7 years that I've participated in it, is that this is a community that wants to share and learn from one another and trade best practices. And you're not sharing your source code with others, but you're sharing your practices of mapping out your value streams. What does your DevOps architecture look like? How do you get an ATO automated within your DevOps pipeline? And those kinds of things aren't trade secrets. They're evenly shared across the industry and community. And as part of All Day DevOps that I run each year, in 2020, we had 34,000 people participate in All Day DevOps. And part of that experience that we delivered was All Day DevOps from day one has been 100% remote conference. It was virtual 5 years ago when we started, still virtual today, but a lot of people are looking for that education where they needed to shift from, we have on-premises, in-classroom training, to now we have to go remote. And some of those in-person training opportunities, or the organizations that provided those didn't have an answer to that. So the industry quickly shifted to that remote learning capability. But I think as a result, the other thing that we're seeing from remote work and maybe more access or at least encouragement to seek remote training opportunities has led to happier workers. There's more people adopting DevOps. They're happier to be working in modernizing practices that are adopting the new tool chain. So if I can go to a place that's using, GitLab or Jenkins or Artifactory or Nexus or any of the other tools that are available out there, I'm more encouraged as a potential employee to want to go and work there. I'm more encouraged if I can do that remotely from where I live. And we've seen one of the things I do at Sonatype each year, I run the Devsecops community survey. And in that survey, we see 45% of people in government organizations participating say that they have some level of DevOps practice implemented. Now, 62% of those also say their practices are immature, but maturing along the way. But those in DevOps practices are generally more happy than those that are in non-DevOps practices. So as we think about, where are our workers? Are they able to complete their work? DevOps is enabling them to complete their work more. And are they happy with what they're doing? And DevOps is leading to higher levels of happiness across the organization as well. So that's just some insight to start off our discussion.
All right. Yeah, a lot of food for thought there and some great jumping off points that we'll get into in a little bit here. But before we go any further, I am going to ask Alyssa if you could please queue up the first survey question here, and we'll get a temperature check of the audience here. What is the biggest barrier your entry is facing during the pandemic? I'll give everyone a moment to fill that out. And it looks like coming in at number one at 33% is adapting to the new normal. So certainly a lot of that going around. Coming in at a distant second, looks like security concerns, and looks like number three is identity and access management issues. Thanks everyone for giving your feedback there. And for the panelists, I'm just gonna kind of take those comments there and kind of maybe fold that into our next question here. Of course, in these kinds of spaces, the old adage goes that you never want to you want to make the most of a crisis or a situation, and certainly the pandemic I think would fit the bill. With that being said, I'll just kind of throw it out to everyone and see who wants to take the first crack at this. But what lessons learned would you say that your agency has adopted as it concerns DevOps with relation to the pandemic?
Yeah, I'll go first on the security front, because that's an easy one for me. 19% of you, thank you out there for saying security is a concern within your organization. So I think if we look at COVID and kind of what changed or what didn't change is your adversaries are still out there. They were 100% remote to your organization anyway, starting off. And while the adversaries are still out there, we're finding them in new places. And I think that's really what the SolarWinds attack showed us, was that we see breaches all the time, whether that's in the public sector or private sector. But the SolarWinds attack was an attack on the tool chain itself. And we talked about the importance of software supply chains and how we're assembling our development pipelines, where those are being assembled. Are they being assembled in on-premises data centers, or more likely now in the cloud somewhere? Who has access to them? Are those tool chains immutable? Do we know who can make changes to them? Do we know what versions of tools we're building with when we're building software? And just as importantly, what is flowing through those software supply chains? So whether that is containers that we are pulling down or accessing from places like Docker Hub or internal repositories, whether that's source code or open source code that we're getting from internal Git repositories or artifact repositories, or whether that's, I think Stephanie was talking about Terraform, your infrastructure as code plans, and where are we getting those? As part of kind of what's flowing through or enabling your software supply chains. And adversaries have taken have moved away from the easier paths of we're just going to go after your network or your endpoints or maybe email into, hey, the data that we want access to lives inside the application. So let's go and try and attack the application. And when that's maybe too difficult to get at, we're going to attack the tool chains that develop those applications, because people may be looking at the code, but not necessarily the tools that are creating that code. And I think that's certainly a shift that we've seen in security, is where do we have to look for where the adversaries have gone next.
Okay.
Any other takers for that question as far as lessons learned?
So for me, this is Stephanie, for me at the FAA, it's just heightened something that we've already known. And it's pretty much what he was just saying. We don't do monitoring well. We don't. And we're and we have been struggling. I'd say the biggest thing that we've struggled with in DevOps is security. Everything about it has been challenging for us. Scanning is hard. Just getting a scan result is hard. We've gone through, I don't know how many monitoring tools. We've tried to make Splunk work. One of the biggest things that we've learned, and that our leadership has learned, because we have been saying this for a long time, is you can't treat the cloud like a data center. And so they've made tools that make automation difficult. They've selected tools. We get these unilateral decisions at us where they choose these tools that aren't cloud aware, aren't cloud smart, aren't, automation is hard in them. And that has been heightened in this pandemic as we face challenges, and we understand that we don't have someone watching, or having that physical eye on everything like we always have. And we're very heavily reliant upon a good monitoring tool and getting to the Devsecops continuous monitoring and continuous ATO things that we have been trying to do for a really, really hard time. But the focus has been less on security and more on cloud adoption for your leadership. They want to see you move to the cloud. So they want to see things in the cloud. And now, they've learned, particularly with this SolarWinds, that we've got to do a better job at monitoring and security. So.
All right, very good. Well, thanks for that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Stephanie just said. I think for NASA, we have tools that do monitoring from a cybersecurity stance on our data centers. But when you move to the cloud and you move to containerization, these tools aren't necessarily built to dive into the containerization layer. And so there are other tools that do that. And those other tools are not quote unquote the cybersecurity approved tool that our cybersecurity team uses. So we have to work very closely with our security folks to say, okay, here's the tool we're going to use to be able to analyze, right, the security posture of these containers and build that trust, just because it's not the tool that they are used to or that they are using. And so we're working through that right now to say, hey, we want cybersecurity to be embedded, and we have tools that will allow that to happen, but let's work together to see how we can move that ball forward.
All right, very good. And because security has taken so much of the conversation right now, I want to kind of throw it to one of the questions in the Q&A, and I'll read it very slowly here because it's you'll see in a moment. DevOps versus DevSecOps or SecDevOps and enterprise architecture role. I can certainly run that by you again. A lot of similar phraseology there, but what what do you take away from that, and what resonates? Perhaps to maybe boil it down into a little bit more concise. Where do you draw the line between DevOps and DevSecOps, and how do you kind of square the security piece with of course everything else that's going on?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. I think from my perspective, when you think about DevOps and DevSecOps, when DevOps was created way back in the day, there wasn't a mindset to exclude security. And so when DevSecOps came along, of course, security says, hey, security is important. Well, it's always been important. And I think it's just a play on words, honestly, a marketing gimmick, if you will. It's the same thing with biz DevOps, right? I'm sure people have heard biz DevOps. Well, yeah, you want to add the business into it. You should have been doing that all along. So you should have had security embedded into your DevOps pipeline or your DevOps construct of your teams from the very beginning. So to me, yeah, I've read articles where, hey, there's a difference between the two. But honestly, if you're practicing DevOps, from the beginning of when it was created or thought of, right? That security layer should have been there all along. That's my point of view.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that. Here's the thing though. So the technical person in me says, yes, security at every layer is necessary, whether it's automated or not, right? You've got to do security. For me, at least the culture at the FAA, if I know when to say DevSecOps and when to say DevOps, because it took a lot to get security to the table, them and the DBAs, but it took a lot to get security to the table. So for me, the DevSecOps was more about the politics of saying, look, security, we can't do this without you. They look at development as solutions delivery. They're over here developing these applications. Then you have infrastructure and operations, and security thinks they don't fit in that, right? And we can't do it without our security directorate in as well. And so for me, it was all about politics and saying DevSecOps to get security to come to the table. So, but I agree with NASA that it is thought about security from the beginning, from even using Packer just to do our base images in the cloud. We thought about security, so.
Yeah, and quickly, I can go ahead and second that as well. It is a little bit of a dance sometimes of when you want to use DevOps versus DevSecOps. Completely agree with Shenandoah. If you're practicing good DevOps, you want to have the security, the automation, everything there. But coming from the Warfare Center, where it's a working capital fund, and you have your people doing the security portion, you have your people doing this. It scares people as the money's coming in for them to do that thing, and you say, oh well, I'm going to now put security, we're going to move it left, help the developers do this, and then you see their eyes get a little bit big, and they're thinking, oh well, is this going to take some of my funding? How is this going to affect the group? And different things like that. So it is a little bit of a dance sometimes, but as long as you can explain that this is not, by doing DevSecOps versus DevOps, this is not replacing anybody's job. This is taking everybody and putting them at the beginning of the software development lifecycle and having everybody work together and move along.
Yeah, I think like Stephanie said, if you can use the term to get the right people at the table, and that encourages the behavior, right? And I see Shenandoah nodding as well, then use that word. But honestly, you can just say DevOps, and that literally should cover everything. And to me, it's simply about, look at your feedback loops. If the feedback loop on some security element is 3 days or 3 months, and you think hey, there's a way to have that be 3 hours or 3 minutes or 3 seconds, because I can produce a tighter feedback loop for someone in development, security, operations, some other role that needs it. If we can produce a tighter feedback loop, that's what DevOps or DevSecOps should aim at, is like, that's the outcome, right? So as Ian's saying, like, shift it into development. Well, if development could benefit from getting feedback in 2 seconds versus 2 hours, let's shoot for that outcome. It makes a better quality, product at the end of the day.
But it's about a policy thing for us, because someone mentioned SonarQube, we had SonarQube built into our tool chain, right? So do the automated scans. Security is still DB protect, web inspect. So if you don't get security to the table, it doesn't matter that you have all these scan results if they don't accept them. If they're still going to stop you and say, okay, you still got to go to KSN and fill out this crazy long form and wait until we actually get to load your scan and then run it and then come back. And the only good thing you have is because you have built in scan automation, you're probably going to have better results. You're not going to have as many findings come back, but still, if we don't get them to the table, then you automate, then you stop. At every, sprint, you automate and then you stop and wait for security. You automate and you stop and wait for security. And that's a challenge for us, a huge challenge.
And I think to even tie into that more, it's like, as Derek was talking about the feedback loops, it's if you're bolting things on at the end, like going through your source code, looking through your static analysis, why not do it as the developers checking in? And I think that's been one of the biggest eye-openings to our developers, is as they check their code and here's the findings. So before you even go to build the application and start doing your functional and user tests, why even build it if we already know there's issues and you have to go back and recode, which may break functionality in the application? So fix it earlier in the process.
All right. Yeah, certainly a very lively discussion there. And thanks again for that question. And please keep those questions coming in. Changing gears here maybe a little bit. We were talking a moment ago about lessons learned. Now I guess it's worth bringing up, like, what do you see as what will stick around, and what changes will occur as a result of the pandemic, and how those changes will impact the world of DevOps here.
I'll take a quick stab. I think the industry as a whole is now accepting that you don't have to have a brick and mortar place. There's been so much emphasis on physical location, and because of the pandemic, we've been able to work very successfully remotely, no matter where we're at, right? Yeah. So for the government side of the house, for us at NASA, we have 10 different centers, and we are starting to look at opening our positions and our jobs within the OCIO outside of even those physical centers, to bring in other talent from other parts of the country, for us. And so I think that as a result of the pandemic, the barriers of entry for remote workers is much easier than it has been in the past. And the digital transformation needed to enable remote workers and the rest of the workforce is probably has now taken steroids, if you will. It's leapfrog. So within NASA, for example, we have a digital transformation initiative that we're working on and we're focused on. And so I think this pandemic has really pushed that whole concept of digital transformation for organizations.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll throw that to everyone else in just a moment, because I think there's plenty to dig into there as far as telework, virtual work, and how all of that fits into IT modernization. But before we do, I am going to throw up another survey question here. Alyssa, if you could have question number 2 ready. What were the greatest challenges as your agency transitioned to a digital organization? And wow, okay, so looks like 37% number one is collaboration, coming in at 26%, all of the above. And coming in at number three is virtual capabilities at 20%. Very eye-opening there. And so just with that in mind, I'll open it back up to the panel here. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about, teleworking, those remote capabilities, and ramping up the IT capabilities to facilitate all of this. What are your thoughts there?
So we immediately had to call FTI as soon as, I mean, the IT, we were all already home, but the moment the business came home with us, it was immediately we had to contact FTI to increase our bandwidth. And we have so many things going on right now where people are talking about slowness of their system, and they're blaming the Isilon, or they're blaming something, and it really is just VPN access. So, making those investments, I don't think we'll go back on, because I think, like someone mentioned earlier, you can expect that a lot of the workforce will be mobile. The point about broadening, we used to have this notion that, we had to have this position in Oklahoma City, or this position needed to be in DC, or this position needed to be up at the tech center in Atlantic City. We no longer feel that way. We open it up to any and everyone. And it took just our leadership seeing that, there's a lot that can be accomplished through automation and through our tool chain virtual, that would allow us to, broaden our selection. And then as a result, we get better talent that comes into the agency. So, but yeah, we definitely had some issues with our bandwidth at first when everyone came home. So.
All right, now I'm just going to go back to the questions here, and I'm going to see. Here's one that seems worthwhile. How do these leaders see the role of configuration management? If anyone wants to take a crack at that.
I think configuration management gets built into the Devsecops process. You have your ticketing systems, your Git repositories, your artifact repositories. So everything is kept under configuration management there. And it's all automated now. A lot of it is there. It's easily viewable by everybody else now in the process, and notes are readily available. And then you can add in all of your scan data to those tickets and keep track of everything. So you see all the products that would come into configuration management are already still there. The processes just get automated.
Yeah, I think that, some of the biggest changes that I know agencies are dealing with is where you can introduce containers or build artifacts or infrastructure as code that can help you keep deployments consistent, keep them auditable, of we know what went out where and what versions of which artifacts went out into this environment, is making sure that whatever is in production is immutable, and there aren't processes that allow drift of, oh, that server is not performing well in production, let me go into production and make that change, right? That the configuration should happen back in development to say, if we want to change the infrastructure, change it in the code and allow that to roll out, so it goes through the standard process of everything and keeps it compliant. Because if you try and standardize or make everything immutable in development and roll it out, but allow some teams to create drift in the production environments, that's where it gets much harder to manage. Because it's like, hey, we plugged that security hole. No, you didn't, because Bob has access to change the production environment, because, right?
So that's been a challenge. Configuration management has with our legacy teams, and for a number of reasons. Number one, you have admins that you're teaching infrastructure as code, but they've never worked in a Git repo before, so they don't understand the concept of a pull request. And so, they struggle with that. And then you have like our, I forget what you call them. We have like a SRE kind of like configuration where we have the gatekeepers of production, and they want you to have a pre-prod environment. And we've been making the case that we have achieved, immutable infrastructure with our DevOps tool chain, and that dev is going to always match test, is going to always match prod. And when you're in the cloud and you're paying for everything, why pay for an extra environment that you really don't need? But it has been a challenge to get them to think that way. We still have to do this pre-prod environment, and they still go through and manually check that pre-prod matches prod, when they should be, instead of looking at the instances, they should be looking at the playbooks and the Terraform templates that we use to provision them and do our post-provisioning processes, because it's gonna run the same. But getting them to make that shift, that mindset change and that cultural shift is difficult. And then an example that someone brought up just a minute ago about production environments is when we were working the 737 MAX issue at the FAA last year sometime, we put the effort up in the cloud, the application that they were using to manage the 737 MAX, getting them back certified. And, we used Terraform to automate it. And when we built those machines, it was just a C drive. And then all of a sudden, something came up urgent and they needed to make a D drive or something, and someone did that in the console. And then all of a sudden we've got to redeploy. And now the Terraform template is like, I don't know what this is because there wasn't a D drive here before, and it breaks things. So CM is hard, getting people to understand the importance that if you're gonna do the automation, stick with the automation and don't make these out of, whatever changes. So,
and you said an operative word there, Stephanie, which is culture change. And I think that brings us to our third and final survey question here. Alyssa, if you could just kind of pull that up here just in a moment here. How much will your agency have to change to adapt to the new normal? And here we go, coming in at number one at 39%. My agency will not have to change a lot of things, but will still have to change a decent amount. That's compared to my agency will have to change a lot of things, coming in at 32%. All right, so generally speaking here, to paint with a broad brush, more than half of respondents are saying that, some level of change is going to have to happen, and it's going to happen fairly soon. Does that resonate with anyone, as far as change management and having to do, perhaps the difficult but necessary thing of implementing that across the workforce?
Yes, I can go ahead and take that first. Especially with the Navy, government entity, we have everything from, these large projects such as, Aegis, Tomahawk missile that have been there. And, we have people working on that, for 30 plus years, versus projects that are just coming in that may be only, a year long, brand new projects. So, taking a look at the culture, especially with, how it's going now, the direction it's going now, the one thing that, the Warfare Center is put into place is actually putting into our strategic plan, putting into our policies, to keep this drive going forward. We don't want people to, get out of the new normal, get back to maybe somewhat of the old normal, and then fall back into their old ways. We want to have those policies in place so that when people do kind of fall back into the old normal, we do go back into the office, if we ever do, we want to have a policy in place to say, we understand you still need to put out products, but you need to start thinking about these things, these policies. You need to have, a CM plan. You need to have your code scans. You need to think about security and all the things like that. I know our Warfare Center has, stood up a group that is actually writing up those policies right now to go along with our strategic plan, along with, the standing up of our software factory foundations, as well as the hybrid cloud initiative to, allow people to come in, collaborate together, use common tools, and, make it, less of a burden to stand up and implement those policies and procedures.
All right, very good. And, I see we're running low on time here, so I'll just kind of open that up as kind of a lightning round for everyone else. If anyone wants to, maybe have that as a closing thought or sentiment.
Sure, I'll go here at NASA. I think, as I said earlier, the pandemic has changed the way we think. There will be a big portion of our workforce within NASA that is going to be working from home. Of course, there are some that have to be physically there as they build the rockets and build the machines that are going out to space. So they physically have to be there. But as we look towards the future of those that are going to be working remotely, we have to look at the buildings that we're in and how our pods are constructed, right? And maybe we shift to hoteling rather than individual pods, as an example. So we're looking at that. We're looking at, does that cost savings of the building itself? Because now the building doesn't have to operate at full capacity, as an example. So I do think there's a lot of challenges around our culture, the government in general, the culture of the government, and needing to be able to put individuals in physical buildings. But I think that has changed, and we've proven that we can operate very effectively. So for us, I think it's more of a culture change that we'll have to go through.
All right, Shenandoah, thanks for that. And that is all the time we have for today. The hour went by so quickly, but thank you to all my panelists. And Kirsten, I'll turn it over to you now.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Great panel, great insights. Up next, we are going to have another emerging technology talk, and this time we will be hearing from Bill Bensing. Bill is the software factory lead and the managing architect over at Red Hat. Over to you, Bill.
Thank you very much. Go ahead and share a screen here real quick. All right, assuming everybody can see that screen, is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
All right. Thank you all very much today. I want to talk about a topic, sharing DevSecOps. So looking at DevSecOps or DevOps as a business process. Here's the argument I want to make. Looking at DevSecOps as a business process, it greatly reduces obstacles to culture change and the scalability that are inherently present when DevSecOps is approached from a tool first instead of a workflow first approach. So what do I mean by tool first versus workflow first? When I talk to folks about their DevOps and DevSecOps practices, I ask, hey, what's your workflow? And it usually starts out with something like, we start with Jenkins, or we got GitHub, then it goes to SonarQube, and then it goes to Nexus. That's a tool first approach. The idea of a workflow first approach is abstracting and bringing out those tools and asking, all right, what do I have to do? I sense a commit. On top of that commit, do I generate some type of metadata? And then do I flow into some type of static analysis? So when you start to think about your workflow instead of the tool sets, this brings an underlying message and helps us look at how we evolve the tool sets and the workflow over time and manage in a better way. So we can think about this, as layers of DevSecOps. I want to bring this book up, How Buildings Learn. It was written by Stuart Brands in '94, but it's concepts by an architect called Frank Duffy. And they look at the rates of change for building and components of an actual physical building. So the shell, it's a building structure to be up to 50 years. Services, your plumbing, your HVAC, those can last up to 15 years. Scenery, that's what's on the outside and some on the inside, that can last up to 5 years. And those furniture decorations, a few weeks. if you look at it this way, what would happen if you prefaced your whole building architecture around the chairs and tables? And if those are changing on a few weeks basis, how would that affect the shell, the services, and the scenery? So as I bring this in, the question I've asked myself is, how can you apply this type of layering effect to something around DevSecOps? Can you rip out the workflow and tools? Can you shear those two layers to bring in and allow for changes over time at a different rate? I am not the first one to think about this. I actually was inspired by Gartner. So Gartner's pace layered architecture is an implementation of this when it looks at application systems. So they've got three aspects Gartner's pace layered architecture does: systems of innovation, systems of differentiation, and systems of record. So those systems of innovation are quickly changing. They have a very short life, and they're there to test what value that system, the human system or technology system, can bring to a market. Those systems of differentiation, those are the money-making systems. That's what differentiates that business, keeps it in business right now, and keeps it competing. And those systems of record, those are ones that just keep the lights on. Think about finance and accounting. So ask yourself, when was the last significant change to our current day accounting system? And when I say a system and accounting perspective, the human system. If you didn't know, double entry bookkeeping was created in 1494 by Luca Pacioli. So a bit of my argument is, our accounting system probably hasn't changed in 300 to 400 years here. So those are those systems of records keeping the lights on. So how would we take this concept and apply this to something like DevSecOps? So DevSecOps has roughly three fundamental layers: a workflow layer, a policy layer, and a toolset layer. The workflow are those processes and steps and the orders of those steps that validate quality as far left as possible. Policies are those specific criteria that a workflow must enforce to classify the quality validation as either good or bad. Simple one, think of static code analysis. It must be 80% code coverage. That's an example of a policy. Now these tool sets are the underlying technology which implements the workflow and enforces those policies. So a workflow should be the slowest changing layer. While new workflows may arise over time, your existing workflows should be fundamentally sound. Policies will always change faster than workflow. So what's determined to be quality today may not be the threshold for quality tomorrow. If you change your policy around a workflow step, that step may not change, but the expectation or that policy that it's required and met is the one that will change more often over time. So I'll use static code analysis again, or compliance or vulnerability scanning. If it's a new CVE or a new, let's go from 80% to 90%, those are examples of policy, but your workflow is fundamentally the same. Now these tools, the tools can be fast changing items of the DevSecOps ecosystem. While some may argue I keep a specific tool for a long time, taking this perspective of sharing these layers allows an organization to decouple its tool implementation from its policy and workflow architecture. This allows for future proofing and some of the utmost organizational flexibility. So what drives change amongst these layers? Simply said, looking at tool sets, policy, and workflow. Workflow is just a new value added step. Is there a new piece of value that I need to add to that quality the customer is willing to pay for? From a policy perspective, you have quality checks, security validation, and/or compliance checks. If it's a new standard that comes out, a new regulatory standard, that's something that would change your policy. Now, tool sets, how do these change? Well, frankly, economics and team preferences is what drives most of these tool changes. So here at Red Hat, in the North American public sector, we've actually, for the DoD, taken these concepts and put this into a service we talk about, which is Red Sword. And it's how Red Hat delivers a trusted software supply chain that's an implementation of the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps reference and design. So as we look through this, the whole concept we asked ourselves is, for a DoD organization and a DoD agency, how could we take and help provide an opinionated way to share the DevSecOps layers so you can focus on the workflow, clearly identify those policies, but also allow for the evolution of tool sets. We know all organizations are going to have different types of tool sets and different values of the tools they use, whether the team values it or it's an economic issue, say like license discounts or whatever it may be. But how do you allow for that utmost standardization so you can focus on getting the mission and business value to the warfighter and or to the end user as quick as possible? With that, I want to thank you all for allowing me to share these ideas of sharing DevSecOps with you today.
Thank you, Bill. That was great. Next up, we will be having another emerging technology talk, and we get to hear from Rob Miller. Rob is the principal sales engineer for the U.S. federal government over at Fordrock. And Rob, please take it away.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here at another great ATARC event. I'm Rob Miller from Fordrock, coming to you from the beautiful city of San Antonio. The last week we were frozen solid. I'm glad that it's 72 degrees outside and not 7. The main thing I learned last week was that heat pumps cannot handle single-digit temperatures. Before I start, I'd like to thank the panelists for their candid commentary. I'm humbled and enlightened by how much I learned. Thank you. So who am I? I'm a principal solutions architect at Fordrock. As Kirsten said, over the next 7 minutes, I'll share how DevOps can help secure FICAM environments and why Fordrock provides the best ICAM platform for that purpose. Next slide, please, Lisa. So who is Fordrock? Founded 11 years ago, Fordrock was a global identity and access management company based in the United States. The founders created the company to continue developing on top of the already mature Sun Identity Management platform. We've come a long way in 11 years and now have the most forward-looking, comprehensive, and complete ICAM platform in the industry. On top of that, Fordrock's technical leaders have been in the ICAM space for several decades. These fantastic people lead and contribute to the industry's top standards boards. Additionally, these same leaders provided the forward-looking vision that prompted Fordrock to transition all of our products to the DevOps containers. Fordrock delivers all components and DevOps configuration templates to implement a complete enterprise-class ICAM environment in less than an hour. Unlike most of our competitors, Fordrock can be deployed on-prem, in the cloud, or any combination required to meet an agency's charter. Throughout the government, we have agencies deployed in enterprise environments, disconnected, intermittently connected, low latency environments, and SIPR and NIPR environments. And we are the only ICAM vendor to provide centralized microservices that seamlessly fit the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps sidecar container security stack to do CI/DC real-time pushes. This hard work and innovation uniquely distinguished us as the only ICAM vendor in the world to be called leaders by the top 3 analyst firms. Next slide, please, Elisa. So FICAM, if you're at this summit, you probably already know about FICAM. In short, GSA's Office of Information Integrity and Access manages the federal ICAM program. FICAM stands for Federal Identity, Credential, and Access Management. To quote the GSA website, ICAM is the set of tools, policies, and systems that an agency uses to enable the right individual to access the right resource at the right time for the right reason in support of federal business objectives. You can use the web address on this slide to reach a FICAM launch point to learn more about the GSA FICAM guidelines. This slide also is taken, or this slide's graphic is also taken from the GSA FICAM website and illustrates the ICAM components of FICAM. Next slide, Alyssa. As you can see, Fordrock has a product mapping for each FICAM component. Fordrock products can function independently from one another and in concert with other ICAM products. But when using the full Fordrock stack, the Fordrock Identity Platform comprises the most comprehensive and complete ICAM platform in the industry. Next slide, please, listen. So why is well-developed DevOps so important? Well, security for one. A containerized application cannot talk to another containerized application unless explicitly permitted to do so outside the application. Additionally, container-to-container communication happens over well-understood and tightly controlled protocols. This kind of gets into the DevOps versus DevSecOps, right? One of the ways I think about it is security is built in to DevSecOps, not bolted on to DevOps, right? This restriction is significant because if one application becomes compromised, it cannot easily corrupt another application. Another critical reason to use DevOps is scalability. A properly developed DevOps application is stateless, meaning it does not hold persistent data. Statelessness is essential because if one application starts to strain under load, The DevOps orchestration will generate another instance of that application to share the load without requiring state transfer or synchronization. When the load decreases, the orchestration engine simply removes the additional instance. This type of scaling happens both horizontally across hardware and vertically across machine resources. What does all this mean to the leaders and the decision makers? First, it means your environment is significantly more secure than a non-containerized environment. The cost of more secure environments is hard to quantify, but we measured in dollars, information, and sometimes lives. Second, it means the compute hardware in your environment, whether on-prem or in the cloud, is fully utilized and is utilized many times more efficiently than with simple virtualization. Better utilization means reduced hardware and facility costs and reduced support staff, excuse me. Third, as your numbers of users increase, you do not have to reconfigure your ICAM environment. It will just scale to meet your demand. Again, this means a reduction in support staff, but it also means fewer highly trained staff, as you do not need many or even any highly skilled ICAM architects. Fourth, unlike competing platforms, Fordrock does not require additional licenses for scaling. One identity equals one license. Regardless of the number of instances of that unique identity, one license per unique identity applies to all your environments, be they production, development, test, etc. One identity, one license across all environments. Fifth, no surge licensing. With Fordrock, you grow at your own pace, any pace, and we true up at an agreed upon interval. No surge licensing means enormous savings over competing platforms. Last, there are production instances of Fordrock that handle over 1 billion identities, billion with a B. This ability to scale means you can grow your agency's ICAM to colossal size without changing vendors or reconfiguring your environment, which serves to the cost, which saves the cost of re-architecting, redeploying, migration, and staff retraining. Next slide, please, Alyssa. In short, we help agencies safely and simply access the connected world. One platform, all identities, any cloud, any premise, any combination. That's straight off the slide. Next slide, Alyssa. Thank you for your time. And for more information, please visit us at fordrock.com or email info@fordrock.com. Back to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Rob. That was awesome. So our last emerging technology talk of the day is up next, and we will be hearing from Matthew Lewandowski. Matthew is the field CTO over at EDB. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I actually did pre-record earlier today my presentation so that I could stick within the time frame. So let me bring that up. Hopefully everybody can see the screen.
Looks good.
Hello and welcome to this short presentation on adding Postgresql to DevOps solutions. My name is Matt Lewandowski. I work for EDB in the CTO office, and I'm a field CTO. In my role as a field CTO, my primary focus is on helping address public sector customer needs. At this point, you might be wondering, what is Postgresql? It's the world's most advanced open source database, and we commonly refer to it as Postgres. You'll hear me refer to it that way once the rest of this presentation. It's a relational database. It's SQL in nature, although it does support NoSQL workloads as well. It's fully enterprise ready and increasingly being used to replace Oracle, SQL Server, and DB2 in many applications. It's used in almost every market sector. In the government, it's being used within the DoD, the intelligence community, in the federal and civilian agencies, as well as at state and local level. It's possibly the most SQL standard compliant database there is, and it's highly extensible. But perhaps what's most relevant for DevOps conception is that it's available for many operating systems and deployment environments. EDB is the largest dedicated Postgresql company. It's been a major contributor to the open source community for a number of years. We provide both leadership in the community as well as contribute to the source code for the database. We offer services and support software around Postgres. We like to say that we supercharge Postgres. In our software offerings, we have support for the open source version of Postgres. We also have a command server edition of Postgres that provides additional enterprise level features in the area of performance, security, as well as Oracle compatibility. The Oracle compatibility there has been important for customers to be able to migrate from Oracle onto Postgres. And then we provide tools around Postgres, monitoring, management, backup, recovery, high availability, and tools of that nature. In the context of DevOps, databases have often been a source of contention. Developers want to move fast, they want to interface, and they don't want to be constrained by operations. And the DBAs need to maintain control. Their systems are crucial off of the back end for mission critical applications. And so you have this tension that exists. PDB provides utilities, products, and services that can help relieve some of that tension. We have scripts to support the deployment in cloud and virtualized environments. We also have a Kubernetes banner offering that can help with microservice-based application architecture. And we also offer capabilities in other areas as well that we touch on. When it comes to deploying Postgres in virtual and cloud instances, we define a set of reference architectures that go beyond just the database itself. They include the tools that support monitoring and backing up the database, as well as maintain high availability and establish a connection to the database. With these architectures in mind, we developed deployment scripts in Terraform, provision resources, and Ansible scripts to install and configure the software. The scripts themselves were built by our CTO office team members, and they are open source and available for your use. The Terraform scripts can be used to provision to AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. And our Ansible scripts can be used to configure and install software in the same environment, but also in private cloud as well. The Ansible scripts are available through the Ansible Galaxy collection. They're also available directly in our GitHub repository. And that's also where you'll find the Terraform scripts as well as information about our reference architecture. For running Postgres and Kubernetes environments, say to support a modern microservice-based application, we offer cloud-native Postgres. Cloud-native Postgres contains two main components: the containers, both PostgreSQL and EDB Postgres Event Server container images, as well as the Kubernetes operator. Cloud-native Postgres has many benefits, but for us, the key aspect of it is that it's built with cloud-native in mind from the beginning. The engineers who built it for cloud-native computing foundation certified. Our images are certified by Red Hat, and our Kubernetes operator is also certified by Red Hat. The operator is declarative in nature, so you define the configuration how many replicas should be part of the environment, and our operator will work to maintain that. It's easy to upgrade the operator, and also the operator itself supports rolling upgrades of Postgres minor version. If you want to find out more information about our cloud-native Postgres offering, I suggest you please check out our website as well as our documentation page. In addition to the scripts that the CTO office has built, as well as the Kubernetes product from our product team, PDB also provides other tools that can be used. A Postgres Enterprise Manager can be used to monitor Postgres, and that can be useful as part of the DevOps processes. In our bidirectional replication tool, which is used for advanced Postgres replication, supports rolling system upgrades, and this can also be useful in your Postgres deployment. And of course, we have professional services to help you in your DevOps work. So in conclusion, we offer Terraform and Ansible scripts to help the deployment of commonly recommended Postgres architectures. We offer a cloud-native Postgres product employed on Postgres and Kubernetes environments, and we also offer other tools and services that can support the Postgres-related DevOps needs. So thank you for your time, and I suggest that you check out these resources, blogs, webinars, and reach out to us with any further questions. Thanks again. Thank you.
Welcome to this short presentation on static Postgresql and DevOps.
And thank you, Matthew.
My name is Matt.
That was a great presentation. Really appreciate it. So next up, we have our last panel of the day, which will be moderated by Tom Temin. Tom is a co-host over at the Federal News Network. Tom, over to you. And you are on mute.
I am right there on the button. Thank you, Kirsten. I want to thank the ATARC people, first of all, for finding the oldest known photograph of me still existing on the internet. And so that's been making the rounds in my social media. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, this last panel is really interesting. Today, we are going to wind up with you by talking about the future of DevOps, Devsecops, and all of the surrounding technologies and practices to make sure that this becomes a sustainable type of activity for the government and for the greater society that benefits from what government does. And we've got some really smart panelists. And what we're going to do is, let me tell you who they are first. You can see the names. We have Christopher Christ. Chris Christ is the Chief of DevOps at U.S. Transportation Command and the military, so we're going to get a military angle on that. Raven Manuel is Senior Developer at the National Museum of African American History. And when you go in there and you touch an exhibit or you have an interactive situation in that great museum, you can thank Raven for a lot of the development work behind that and keeping it updated all the time. David Ray is a Micro Focus Government Solutions Chief Technology Officer, looking at this from the commercial side, and he's going to be discussing to some degree how what Micro Focus deploys to the government is in many ways the dog food that it eats in developing its own applications. We'll get into that some more. Ed Phillips is National Geospatial Tech Ops Center IT Specialist. That doesn't really do justice to how much this guy knows, and he's going to impart some of that later on for us in that whole digital mapping area. And we've got Paula Wagner. She's Chief of Systems Delivery in the Office of IT at Homeland Security. There's a bunch of other agencies leading up to Homeland Security in between there, but basically she's at that end point of DevSecOps where we actually have to deliver something that people can use. So we've got a really good set of panelists for you today in the 45 minutes or so we have left. We're going to have a Q&A session. I'm going to do most of the questioning. You probably know that there is a question and answer box that you've been using all day. Feel free to submit a question in there. I can see it on my screen here since I've got like really big monitor here, 2 of them. And so if you have it directed to a specific panelist, let me know that. Otherwise, we'll throw it open to the group. And I guess we're going to have some polling questions, and I'm going to leave it to the operators to tell me when those are launching, and we'll see what happens then. This is kind of a little bit of a 3-ring circus, so you'll bear with us on operating all of these screens. And so our first question is really the future of DevOps. I keep saying DevSecOps because I think that syllable is going to be coming into this discussion as we go. But the future of it, I'm going to ask each panelist from their particular perspective. And I'm just going to start at random with Raven, because you are kind of at the intersection between high tech and government and really meeting the public in a very, very popular venue that has a unique mission and also some unique approaches to how museums operate. So Raven, what do you see ahead from the standpoint of deploying that kind of high touch consumer type of application?
Thank you, Tom, for the nice introduction. We are unique, and that's part of the challenge is that we don't produce software. We produce interactives. And because our interactives are always like one-offs, we have various people other than myself that actually develop these interactives. So we have a lot of different contractors that develop interactives. As a DevSec engineer, DevOps engineer, not DevSec, DevOps engineer, one of the things that I'm tasked with is to come up with a strategy that all the teams can use, which is really hard when you've got a number of contracted teams that are not from the same organization. They're from all different types of organizations with different skill sets. And so for me, one of the things that I am looking into that I really would hope that is in the future, it seems that it's in the future, is standards, to have different type of standards. Like the Open Container Initiative is one of the standard bearing that, so that you don't have to worry about whether or not you're using Docker or Circle CI or some other kind of containerization. You can actually use go for a standard with your CI/CD workflow. And then if something happens and the vendor doesn't support it, or it's one vendor doesn't support another, like Red Hat's not supporting Docker anymore, right? So what we have to do is we have to put in something else that is supported by our bigger picture. So for me, I'm looking for some standardization and hoping that that's the way that this is going. So we don't have to worry about, especially for tooling, we don't have to worry about picking a name. We can go ahead and pick a standard. And then maybe if the teams are well-versed and well refreshed in those different types of standards, they'll be able to use a common tool.
Sure. So it's really important for those vendors that you're using to stick to those standards, and everyone has a common understanding both of the inputs and the outputs, because you need interoperability eventually from what it is these contractors are producing for you. Fair way to put it?
Exactly. Yes. Interoperability is the way, and we need to be adaptable and flexible because of the myriad of people that we have working together. It's perfect.
Okay, great. And I'm going to move on to Chris Christ of the U.S. Transportation Command, maybe the opposite end of consumer versus highly governmental specific types of applications. And Chris has and I'm going to let him explain it, but a concept of a fairly new word called GitOps, and it has to do with the management of code and so forth. Chris, why don't you tell us where you see this all heading?
Yeah, sure. So here at U.S. Transportation Command, we're certainly moving forward with that next concept of GitOps, and we're actually moving towards a new environment. And in that environment, we intend to implement GitOps as well as an end-to-end pipeline solution. But the idea behind GitOps, I mean, there are a lot of benefits to it, but one thing that we are really looking into is really looking at infrastructure as code and pushing that through the same process as any other code. So GitOps is the equation is infrastructure as code plus merge requests plus CI/CD. So we're really looking forward to implementing that. There's a concept called Git being the source of truth as well. So we're digging into that, and actually just this week, hopefully, we're hoping to get a product that will help us to start kind of evaluating the methodology, if you will, in that new environment. So yeah, really excited about that. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so the theme I'm hearing emerging for both Raven and Chris is that no matter how newfangled the concepts are in software development and how fast we're doing these scrums and sprints, standards, discipline, source of truth is just as important now as it was in the early days of coding, back in the assembly days in some ways, where they had those disciplines, I guess, really have their roots. And I'm going to move to David Ray from the industry side here now, and tell us about some of the products that have come out of the Micro Focus's own development work.
Sure.
In the products that you deploy.
Well, thanks for that, Tom. We realized early on that a lot of the solutions and products we offer that are pretty familiar in government today, things for software assurance, software testing, and the CI/CD and the DevOps pipeline, as well as our orchestration suite for ITOM, we're really being used part of software factories and part of the DevOps toolchain with a bunch of other products. And internally within our own R&D, we realized we had a lot of sprawl. You know, at some point, about 80 to 90 test tools alone, about 200 different products in our tool chain. And we wanted to reduce our supply chain risk with the production of products ourselves. So we decided to drink our own champagne and leverage our own products to develop a internal R&D software factory.
You take good care of your dog.
Yes, take care of my dog. Yeah, he's behind me, by the way. I prefer the champagne analogy versus the dog food. But we work very hard to create enterprise services. So I think the future of DevOps is really about standardization enterprise services. And we were able to rationalize over 200 products down to a dozen products in our tool chain. And what made it very interesting was creating those enterprise services so we could have a service owner, a business owner, as well as service levels and an MOU back to the development teams on what we were providing as a service. And we didn't leave it up to the teams to just willy-nilly select tools and pull down modules for development or open source products for CI and CD that may have vulnerabilities in them. So we really locked that down. We are using Git as a single source of truth for all collaboration for products, and we're using Artifactories. It's not all of our products, but we did. It is extremely rationalized, and it's all centered around digital services. And I think the government could learn a lot from that. And we'd like to offer these services back at some point, as maybe as a FedRAMP, consumable architecture. So you could actually leverage a service and then provide it to all of your developers and contractors within an agency, let's say, for a specific use case, like software assurance, or software testing.
And just hearing between the lines of what you said, it sounds like, given the people involved and the fact that the development teams aren't completely autonomous, that you have developed the culture surrounding DevOps that we hear often is so important a component in success there.
Yes, we heard others talk about that today, about workflow and tool chain, but we're really talking now about consumable services. So we're doing it for the business. We're developing a digital economy, and we're developing citizen services that are digital, but IT itself has to look inward and figure out how we can provide these services to the developers and to operations to secure the environment through the entire tool chain. And we don't do that very often. A lot of times developers and the development shops and IT shops are run on shoestring government budgets within government, and it's everybody kind of creates their own thing for their program. I don't know if any of the other folks on the call want to comment on that, but it seems to be a lot of local excellence in DevOps at the program level in government, and not much enterprise excellence. And so when you try to do things like enterprise scale safe, you can't, because it's very hard to get buy-in. It's not worked into the contract vehicles. Those responsibilities are owned by contractors and SIs a lot of times, and it's hard to get consistent metrics, quality metrics, in order to govern everything. And we were able to get all of that. We have a single Kanban for over 500 products in development across the entire country with a worldwide development team. Just to give you an example, we're scanning,
all right, so it's
30 million lines of code a night. That kind of scale.
Got it. So it's happening at the grassroots. What we need is a really good looking lawn at some point with all these grassroots. Okay, we'll come back to that question, but I want to get to Ed Phillips. If anything could be described as a factory, but a really nice contemporary 21st century looking factory, it's the NGA, because I've been to the building out there towards Belvoir, and but it's all devoted to understanding the globe and what's on it better. So Ed, tell us about some of the DevOps futures you see at NGA, where it's a constant stream of new products.
I'll make a correction. I'm with USGS. I'm definitely very familiar with the NGA. They are a sister mapping agency.
Yeah, I gotta take notes so I can read better.
Oh, that's fine. No, we are domestic focused, and they are more intelligence agency focused. There are cross, technologies that span between the two agencies, very similar. In the last, several years, like all agents, we moved to the cloud, and primarily AWS. And an interesting phenomenon happened in there. The developers took to it more than the legacy IT folks, and it was a very malleable environment, and the developers got to impose a lot of what they saw best practices and things that worked for them. And so it lent itself to adopting the newest technologies coming out of industry, implementations of Tableau, GitLab, Docker, containers. All those services went up, and they went up fast, and they weren't impeded by a large, I'd say, bureaucracy of IT and security rules that you find in your traditional data centers. So we've learned a lot, and that's driven your agency, right? And we've brought in some talent via contractor talent that have the right credentials and experience. They're expensive people. They come out of the Amazon enterprise support arena. We're growing our own. We're getting training opportunities for internal staff. You do get some cross work there. We've brought across people from our IT services silos into development, and we've moved people out of our developer roles into the IT. So fish out of water both ways. But in doing that, we're merging and creating these teams that bring and intersect that, called DevOps teams, and they're sharing those lessons learned across both agencies. I will say, we are redesigning our on-premise. On-premise hasn't gone away. We still run data centers. One of our biggest challenges is data, right? We push petabytes. So we can't move everything to the cloud. There's cost. It limits what we can do. So there are processes that we still do on-premise. And we are now going through a redesign of our on-premise data centers, and we're taking those lessons learned from the things that we discovered in working in the cloud environment. And we're applying those now with our, as we partner with vendors for redesigning our premise to make it more, they call the hybrid cloud, right? And to make our compute resources much more flexible for our on-premise customers. So.
And I wanted to follow up with something that you mentioned about still being hybrid and still having your own infrastructure. You've also been working on the idea of infrastructure as code.
Yes, and that took best in the cloud, and it has become a de facto standard with our organization with the cloud, right? All work in in our Amazon environment is done infrastructure as code. Every component that we set up. And one of the biggest benefits to that I've seen is it's got built-in documentation, right? When you lose staff, if someone didn't document very well or build the SOPs as you'd like, it can be very hard to recreate an enterprise platform that's stood up that comes down. When you've got that infrastructure as a code, you've got built-in documentation too. Very easy to come back and rescale your enterprise application. If you've undersized your compute, you can scale that out pretty, a couple lines of script code usually is about all it takes to bring that back. So that is one of the biggest lessons that we're bringing back to our on-premise, how to build and implement the Terraform and the GitLab environment while we're building up our on-premise cloud or, VMware a cloud to allow that flexibility for our on-premise customers. So it's less of them concerning, set up named servers and looking at more as just a pool of compute resource.
Okay, and I'm going to move to Paula, because your title, Chief of Systems Delivery, sounds like the final gate before all of that development work, all of that thinking, and all of that teaming behind the scenes gets out of the starting gate, goes down the track in actual use. So tell us how DevOps is helping delivery, and tell us what you see ahead and maybe a little bit about what you do there at USCIS.
Hey there, Tom. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the question. Hi, everyone. I'm Paula. I work at USCIS. And as Tom mentioned, I am in charge of delivery at USCIS. We have about 90 federal employees and probably about over 500 contractors pushing out functionality to our customers, both internal and external. And as far as DevOps goes, we've really transitioned over to Devsecops. So we've really made a huge commitment on including security as part of our development teams when we push out our code. But as Raven and Chris said, we're also looking to standardize or create an enterprise CI/CD pipeline that we can all leverage. Because right now, just within SDD alone, we probably have 10 to 12 different pipelines that we manage. And, as I think, Tom, you said, when contractors come and go, it's hard for them to manage these CI/CD pipelines that turn out to be more like snowflakes. So looking at it from an enterprise perspective would be really helpful for us. And then just to touch on GitOps, so we're also trying to move in that direction as well, having Git as our centralized area where we have everything in there, including, and we also leverage Jira and Confluence, but we're really trying to get design included in there as well, so that from a design perspective, development, security, operations, it's all in one centralized location, and we're working as a team together. So we have a lot going there that we're trying to manage. And we're looking to the horizon to, expand this to more of our programs. We've got programs in all different stages. And so we're trying to share best practices and then be more collaborative across all of our groups.
All right, so a lot of activities going on, and I just want to get a
Sorry, too much?
not in the least. No, in fact, I think the gears on the wall are kind of tell the whole story right there. But I wanted to
Oh, yeah.
ask a question that kind of came to mind, Paula, with what you said toward the end there, all this collaboration and contractors. Raven said similar things. And that is, there's a pandemic going on. And in the culture of collaboration, people often think of collaboration as taking place within earshot of the person you're collaborating with. Clearly, that has not happened. I just will go around, maybe starting with you, Paula. What effect has that had, if any? And maybe it's been a positive effect, but the idea that you have to collaborate like we are now with all the screen fatigue. This is about my 4th hour today on this kind of situation. So, if I get a couple agencies wrong, you'll forgive me, but what's been the effect of the pandemic? And from my perspective, we're going to go around counterclockwise, at least the way my screen looks. So Paula, why don't we start with you?
Sure, yeah. So for us, we are extremely lucky. We have a great group of folks that work with us at CIS, and we were very much a telework focused organization before the pandemic. And so we actually have seen, at least from our contractors and our PMs and our product owners, product managers, designers, actually an increase in productivity. I think, folks don't have to have lengthy commutes, which, I mean, everyone probably knows CIS is moving to Maryland. So being able to telework is great for someone who lives in Arlington, Virginia. So it's nice that we've been able to be successful across collaboration. We leverage Teams at CIS, and we're really good about leveraging the chat functions, sharing files on there, and then we do a lot of, like we're doing today, conferences, brown bags, IPTs. So we've tried to increase the collaboration through virtual means because, yeah, collaboration is huge. You will be successful.
And Ed, of course, you're speaking to us from beautiful riverbank somewhere, probably with USGS.
It's my basement.
There's probably USGS marker somewhere on the top of one of those rocks. So Ed, what has the pandemic effect been there in terms of collaboration and in this whole?
Yeah, absolutely. Remarkable. We've had the same experience. We did not lose our velocity on our goals in the last year. The established staff may have even been more productive. I will say that I have concerns about maybe there's a debt building when we've onboarded new tech, especially in the technical arena, some of the newer technical teams. My impression is that they aren't getting up to speed as fast as maybe they would when we had the ability to do more interactive in-person collaboration, but this we'll see as time goes on how that really shakes out. I will say the adoption of, this is hand it to the technology people of I'd say the whole country to what they have managed to achieve for everyone working in all industries. We took millions of people and put them all instantly. I can't even imagine our VPN providers, what they went through, a year ago when everyone had to telework at the same time, but they did it and they managed it. And alongside that, I would say, the adoption of collaboration tools. There are many that were already out there, but they've become extremely popular. Miro, new one that I got introduced to, fantastic whiteboard experience. Obviously the other collaborations, Teams or whatever Google people are using. That they've, everybody's been forced to use those, but I think they're going to be around for the long term. They've proven their worth, even if we do go back into a more in the office environment.
Sure. And as to what some of those VPN providers were going through, it could have been an initial public offering, the way the demand grew, I think, in the past pandemic. And Raven, how about at the museum?
For the same story as Paula, for the IT team, like we were already disparate, like everybody was everywhere anyway. I live in the mountains of Virginia, and I only had to come into the DC like one day a week. Where it was a little bit dicey was with the product owners and the stakeholders and those that were not in IT, everybody that was not like the curators and the historians and the people who were used to meeting in a conference room or going to somebody's desk. That's where it was a little bit dicey for us when the IT team had to collaborate with people who were not used to it. What it did do is we use MS Teams as well. It made it so that the IT team was not using all of these various communication tools, because we were using Slack, and also in Discord, all sorts of different team in different collaboration tools. But now we had to standardize, okay, on one so that people could reach you on the one platform. So that was one of the good things that came out of it. Because for me, I had so many Slack windows open, it was ridiculous because everybody was making a Slack channel on these different platforms. But we did really well, especially in the IT group.
Yeah, well, where I work, if all else fails, we text each other on our cell phones. And hey, put it on Slack. Well, yeah, this is getting to be annoying here. Chris, what about US Transcom? I mean, that's a kind of a scattered organization in some ways to begin with.
Yeah, sure. I would say increased productivity, but I think that that's for sure what we've experienced here. But I would say that I want to focus a little bit more on recruitment. And, I mentioned this in the past, but, I think that those people that are at the edge of DevSecOps and they're getting into GitOps or AI ops, those people that know this stuff, they're getting paid pretty well out there, I would say. And, but we can still attract them to government service, right? Civil service. However, what I've experienced in the past before this whole thing went down is that as soon as they find out that they have to come into the office, it's a completely different conversation. And, they love the mission. They want to have an impact, but they want that flexibility. At least a lot of the ones that I've talked to that are computer scientists and have this stuff down, they want to work remote. And so I'm hopeful that after this is all said and done, that we keep some of these things in place so that we can recruit top talent.
Yeah, I think everybody wants to kind of get together a little bit more, but nobody wants the traffic to come back. And if we could have that nirvana, I think we'd perfect the workplace in some ways. David, what about for the corporate view? What's going on there, and how has the pandemic affected things?
I think we struggled to get away from our phones the last 5 years. When the pandemic hit, I noticed our cell phone usage went way down, and it all got transitioned to virtual. And we actually now have adoption for collaboration tools, which we always struggled with. And there's no excuse for not being at your desk, which if you can imagine as sales and business development folks running around as part of the excuse of just not being available. So we've been a lot more productive in a lot of ways on the projects that always took a lot of collaboration. So I guess that's one positive side. And Chris, I don't think we're ever going back. Just to give you an idea, a lot of the spaces we were leasing worldwide, we're not going to renew a lot of those leases. Most of us were working remote, but we're really making that transition now to seeing that we can still produce the revenue and the profit we were producing before the pandemic, and we're doing it better and more efficiently, and we're all remote. So why invest in a lot of the travel and the hotel cost and some of the things you may expect. I don't know what that means to industry, or in general, or our economy, but that's just something I noticed.
Sure, so, interesting. Well, we'll all be moving into those office buildings and turning them into lofts or something with big windows.
I do concur. It's really tough on new hires, though. I mean, it's getting people to know people. It's hard to do virtually. I've noticed that they really seem to struggle because they don't have the base of contacts internally to work with. They're a little shy.
Sure. And that brings me to the question I'm going to pose to Kirsten or Alyssa here. There was a poll question we were going to launch at this point. If you want to serve that up, we can ask, because it concerns how your agency has done in embracing, or your company, I guess we could add, in this new normal. Can we get that question launched and see how people say?
Alyssa will be launching that one.
Okay. And well, let's give that a second. And while that launches, I'm going to go into the next question, and we may pause that answer to get this poll question done. But oh, there it is. Okay. In your opinion, how has your agency done in embracing the new normal in the in the federal DevOps space. And if you're a company, you can answer it too. It's all right. There's still more than 100 people with us. Great. We have fully embraced it. We are still working on embracing the new normal. We are working towards embracing the new normal, but still have a great deal of work to get there. We have not embraced it. So that means if you answer that, you're not in business and therefore you're not here. So probably nobody will say that one. So let's take 10 seconds and click one of those buttons and we'll see what happens.
The thing is, Tom, the new normal is changing. So you can't fully embrace it because it keeps changing.
Well, yeah, 43% say we have embraced it. 30, you can see the answers there. 30% we are still working on embracing because the new normal is a moving target, I think is what you're saying, Raven. We're moving towards it. That's 23%. 5% we have not embraced it. Or maybe they're doing it, they just don't like it. That's what they mean by that answer. Okay. And Chris, something you said about onboarding brings me to a question we have from my friend Gail Azaroff, and this came up today in a discussion I was having with a major vendor that has some major federal contracts going in 3 different departments, all for essentially the same product, and that is Cerner in the electronic health record. And these projects are moving along, but in many cases, in the case of the Coast Guard, they're replacing paper, so there's no learning curve there. But in replacing existing systems, you still have existing people that may have 20, 30 years experience on those. They were capable, but they just need to be updated for the 21st century, VA and the Vista and so on. So the question is, how do you keep people up to date? How do you reskill people or skill people that are coming in that don't have these DevOps cultural and technical norms, imbued in them? So how do we get those people up to speed? Anyone want to start on that one? Chris, I'll put you on the spot since
Sure. So yeah, I'm very familiar with Cerner, by the way.
Also, you're not on mute, so.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I was the CIO of a hospital system before, of actually a few, and definitely was familiar with Cerner. We implemented Cerner throughout our organization. But yeah, so when it comes to DevOps and getting the skill set out there, we actually have, so my team, my government team, we've over the course of about a year and a half, we've really matured to being educators, more so than anything else. Collaborators, educators, getting people to understand this path and why we need to do it. And what's awesome is that we now have, we do have an onboarding process, a formal onboarding process for programs, but we're also working with those individual components, Air Mobility Command, STDC, which is service and basically essentially an Army command, and then Navy command, working with them and their programs to help with their contract language, their PWSs and what they need to do. And then we have experts within my branch that deal with each of the services. So we have, for example, a code analysis service or a source code service or a release/artifact repo service. And those individuals can help people to help understand that piece of the pipeline. So we spend a lot of our time educating plenty of individuals, and especially those that are hopeful to transition from a legacy-based way of doing things to a newer way of development.
Sure. Ed, can you teach old dogs new tricks, or bringing in new pups and making sure they understand how the whole DevOps works so that we can sustain this into the future?
Yes, you can, but not, I won't say that it's not without challenges. There are still legacy IT silos in our environment. You do have to spend money and time. You can't get everybody to training, but you can get a pretty big bang for your buck if you can get to some of your people to training and or hire good talent. You can't fill every role with an all-star, but you can get a couple of them, and it shows. It just does take time. I'd say after they've been here for a year or two, you start getting people to see what they're seeing and understand the benefit that this works to getting the whole organization to its goals.
Yeah, and Paula, what about from your perspective with this need to be delivering all the time? You have to have the people that have the skills, and so what's your skilling strategy?
So we've done a few things. So internally for USCIS, we have conducted tech talks that we do at least once a month. Some are more frequent, and where we have folks come in and chat with us over lunch, or we have different organizations within CIS to come in and kind of talk about what they're doing. So for example, we had Sean Benjamin, who runs all of our enterprise analytics, had him come in and kind of talk about all the tools and what we do over there to kind of help folks in other organizations leverage our enterprise tools for analytics. So we have tech talks. We also created a contract with folks around a innovation lab where we bring in new technologies and test out prototypes with different groups on little pieces of functionality that might not have been able to get to, but want to try out a new technology. So we give it to the innovation lab with some of our folks around there and help us try out new tools. And then on top of that, we also are pretty big with paired programming. So that's helping us with our developers that are federal employees, and then also our contractors learning new best practices to help us deliver code. And then obviously we also have, just brown bags, IPTs, and then we have a good training budget that we make sure that we try everyone to use. And then we also just set up classes, group classes. We have folks come in and then take, like we did a Tableau class, because now we have that as one of the enterprise tools.
So if there was a programmer somewhere and they were devoted to keeping a legacy system going, and they would go into the C code or the COBOL code or whatever the old code might be, and they said to you, I want to get into this modern stuff, this DevOps area, and it's different languages, and it's also different architectures for how you create code and how you account for code and all the ancillary services that are connected to the code. Your answer would be, sure, here's some training money?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Because I've known programmers who would rather retire than go that way. And so it's, when you get those people, you want to make sure you can bring them along.
No, it's interesting. I mean, for one of our areas, it's called Did It, and that's our development organization that provides enterprise technology products to our customers in-house. And so a lot of the apps that we had created were in Cold Fusion. And obviously a lot of those developers are still with us, but now we've moved to Ruby. And so a lot of most of those guys, we had to keep a few obviously running Cold Fusion apps because we haven't transitioned all of them, but most of them have taken up Ruby so that they can modernize those applications.
Sure. So we've all been around long enough to see what was the hot new thing become the obsolete thing, and the cycle seems to be getting shorter and shorter. Raven?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have internally, which is really kind of cool. It goes back to what David was saying about being able to, how DevOps is like singular. The Smithsonian is made up of different units. There's 19 museums and several research centers, and every one of those are there. We are on our own private Idaho. Like we do what we want to do in our things, and we use shared services that are offered by OCIO, which is our enterprise IT. They are not doing DevOps as like I'm doing DevOps in my unit. So internally, what we have done, we being the other unit developers, we have something called First Fridays. So every First Friday, somebody teaches some new thing or to share some new thing that they are doing, and you kind of network at that event as well. When we were in person, we had devs at SI, which was eat all this food that we brought in, and it was the same type of thing where we'd have people just share like whatever big wow that we're doing, and to hear what everybody is doing. And this way we could actually, we would be able to, we're not trying to overwhelm OCIO, but we are trying to push OCIO. So as the units together, if we get together, like 3 or 4 units want to do something, and then we approach OCIO with it, then it's harder for them to say no, because the more than one unit is actually trying to do it. So we try to teach each other and doing that, and doing online training, of course.
Well, if everybody home, you can't bring them lunch, I guess, like you could, but maybe
No.
them all gardening at home, they can all get a bag of Zoodoo or something in the spring.
Exactly. That's why the
Gardening
devs at SI is, that's why it's kind of a low key. I'm hoping that that actually comes back, as I would actually host those. And I just love to feed people food. Just come and eat and have fun.
All right, I'm going to train with your group the next time when we all come back here. And David, last comment on training and reskilling and upskilling people, and then I've got a couple of lightning round questions before we wrap up.
Sure. Well, I'll try to make it pretty quick. One of the advantages of having an enterprise approach to DevSecOps is that you can establish a service owner and a business owner. And what we did is we gave the accountability for all the training and enablement to the business owner. He owns the service from a business perspective and then communicates back to the service owner on changes and specific things that they need. So all the enablement was done enterprise-wide, and we used a lot of our tools for computer-based training and online training that are reusable to push out use cases for DevSecOps, how to use it, show me how to use it, where is it, and of course the business owner can walk them through that. So we really had to separate those duties. And then about the reskilling of folks, this really applies mainly to our customers. I like to say you can teach a young dog old tricks, a little different twist on that. And that's because we own a lot of the host connectivity. We own Micro Focus COBOL, we own Borland. So we have a lot of the older, technology tools in our portfolio.
Did you say Borland?
Correct. And,
wow.
And Novell tools, NetIQ, all those tools are part of our portfolio in addition to some of the Hewlett Packard tools we assume, like Fortify, Quality Center, Load Runner, these tools that we have for DevOps. But what we've been able to do pretty effectively worldwide is shift COBOL to be compiled on Linux in the cloud or on a cloud architecture on premise. And what that does is it allows the newer, younger developers to easily, use their DevOps tools, the IDE they love, all the DevOps services they love and all they have to do is learn COBOL. The infrastructure support side, the enterprise operations side of the mainframe and the legacy technologies are no longer needed once you shift and rehost the technology. It's very different than Refactor. Once you get in the cloud, then you can begin rewriting Refactor if you need to, but you can also encapsulate a lot of that code and use web services. So we've been able to transform a lot of those legacy apps with newer developers and have one DevOps solution for both legacy folks and standard end-tier architecture web-based developers. So that really helped with the enablement.
Interesting. Okay, so there is a future for DevOps. I think we have concluded in this panel. A couple of quick questions. Here's one. I don't know who can best answer this, and I don't know precisely what it means, but the question is, what is the difference between DevOps and no-ops? Okay, we'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Udaya, we'll have to get back to you on that one. And here's a question, I guess, is for Paula. Is there broader DHS? Is there broader DHF software lab that CIS uses, or did you stand up your own? Or is there a big DHS lab, or is there, or both? Is the answer?
No, it was just CIS.
Okay.
We stood it up ourselves.
All right, and I know we're a minute or two over, but I want to get to Udaya's question. Any common DevOps approach across federal agencies or shared services kind of things on common tools and technology and NIST standards for FedRAMP? Boy, we could go on for half an hour about that one, but anyone want to knock that one out? The question is, are there any common DevOps approaches across federal agencies or shared services kinds of things on common tools and technology?
Sure,
NIST standards.
The easiest thing to mention is what Nicholas Chilean's been doing within Air Force. He's created, a platform one and the cloud one and the services around that. It's mainly around automating infrastructure builds so they're secure. There's not a lot of enterprise services other than the services to build your own software factory or farm. And I know GSA has been trying, I think DHS has been trying to deploy something similar, like the repo or repository.
Okay, fascinating stuff. We are over time, so I want to thank our panelists very much, Raven, Chris, David, Ed, and Paula, and I'm going to turn it back to Kirsten. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was a wonderful panel. Thank you to our panelists and our moderator, Tom, for this discussion. I would like to close this out by thanking everyone who joined us today, all of our panels, all of our moderators, and our fireside chat with Lauren. It was just incredible. I would also like to thank our partners again. So thank you to our partners over at GitLab, CloudBees, Sonatype, Red Hat, Fordrock, EDB, and Micro Focus Government Solutions. We always enjoy working with you guys so much. This is my time to plug our DevOps working group. We've actually had quite a few of our project shares on this panel discussion today who are involved, such as Raven. So to get involved, please reach out to ATARC, or you can contact me directly and we can set up a time to chat about which project team you should focus on. Alyssa will include my information in her wrap-up email following this event. So we'd really like to get more people involved. And before we close out today, I would also like to share one last event that we have on Thursday of this week. So join us for a discussion with topic experts that will focus on the need to secure machine-to-machine interaction in the fast-moving InfoSec category, machine identity management. You will get to hear from federal leaders on the unique challenges of managing machine identities across hybrid cloud environments. So we will be including that registration in our wrap-up email as well. And we really hope to see you there. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and a great week as well. Talk to you soon.